They called him a homeless man. She called him by his name, and that changed everything. Maya Johnson was 22 years old, and survival was her full-time job. Her alarm rang at 5 a.m. in a small apartment where the heater rattled louder than it warmed. Mornings, she worked at a diner, serving people who barely looked at her. Evenings, she stacked shelves in a grocery store under harsh fluorescent lights. In between, she studied online. She wasn't chasing money, she was chasing meaning. Ever since her mother got sick years earlier, Maya had wanted to become a nurse. She remembered the nurses who treated her mom with patience, with dignity. They didn't just see an illness, they saw a person. Maya wanted to be that kind of person. Every morning at 6:15, she waited for the bus near an abandoned laundromat on 8th Street. Cracked bricks, broken windows, graffiti layered like scars. And against that wall sat a man, same place, every day. Thin gray blanket around his shoulders, cardboard sign at his feet. Anything helps, God bless. People walked past. Some avoided eye contact. Some looked annoyed. Maya noticed him, and at first she kept walking too. Not because she didn't care, but because she was tired. Because when you're barely holding your own life together, stopping feels expensive. Until one freezing morning, the wind cut through her coat. The man was shaking violently, hands red, cracked, shoulders trembling against brick. She slowed down. In her bag was a sandwich she hadn't eaten the night before. It was supposed to be her lunch. She hesitated. Then she turned around. "Sir, have you eaten today?" He lifted his head slowly. Pale blue eyes, clear, steady. "Not today." His voice was calm, educated, dignified. She handed him the sandwich. He accepted it carefully. "Thank you," he said. "That's very kind." "I'm Maya." A faint smile crossed his face. Daniel Carter." The bus arrived, but something inside her had shifted. The next morning, she brought him coffee. "2 sugars?" she asked. He looked surprised. "You remembered." I listened. 5 minutes became their ritual. 5 minutes before the bus came, 5 minutes in a city that rarely noticed anyone falling behind. Daniel never asked for money. Instead, he asked about her classes. "Why nursing?" he asked. "Because when my mom was sick, the nurses treated her like she mattered, even when she felt invisible." Daniel nodded slowly. "Seeing people," he murmured, "that's rare." One morning, he said something unexpected. "I used to fly helicopters." She didn't laugh. She didn't doubt him. She listened. Army aviation, medevac missions. He described rotor vibration, night extractions, dust storms, the silence before landing. The details were precise, technical, real. "What happened?" she asked gently. His expression tightened. "I reported something I shouldn't have," he said quietly, "something powerful people didn't want exposed." He didn't explain further, but she saw it. Not confusion, betrayal. Winter deepened. Maya brought gloves when she could, clean socks, a wool hat. "You don't have much yourself," Daniel told her once. "I have enough." Then one night, everything changed. After her late shift, she saw him hunched over, coughing violently, breathing shallow, skin pale. "You need a hospital." "No insurance," he whispered. "I don't care." She called 911. As paramedics lifted him onto the stretcher, he grabbed her wrist. "You didn't have to stop that first morning," he said softly, "but you did." The ambulance doors closed, and for the first time, the corner was empty. At the hospital, doctors confirmed severe pneumonia. If he had waited another day, a nurse said quietly, he might not have made it. Maya visited after work, sat beside him as machines beeped steadily. "Why help me?" Daniel asked an afternoon. She thought of her mother, of strangers who chose kindness. "Because someone helped my mom when they didn't have to," she said, "and it meant everything." He studied her for a long moment. "You see people," he said. "Most don't." During his stay, a social worker began verifying his information: full name, date of birth, branch of service. At first, nothing. Then a record appeared, then another. Flight hours, commendations, deployment history, decorations. Daniel Carter wasn't just a homeless man, he was a decorated Army helicopter pilot. The hospital staff began speaking differently, standing straighter, listening longer. Maya watched quietly as the world adjusted its lens. The man people stepped over every morning had once flown into danger to bring others home. But as more records surfaced, it became clear his story wasn't only about service, it was about something near the end, something he reported, something buried. Daniel didn't know calls were being made, that old files were being reopened, that quiet questions were turning into real conversations. He didn't know the past was moving again, and neither did Maya. But the truth had started to breathe.
The truth doesn't disappear. It waits. While Daniel Carter lay in that hospital bed, weak but alive, something was happening behind the scenes. Old military records were being reviewed. Archived reports were being reopened. Names that hadn't been spoken in years were being mentioned again, quietly at first. It started with a hospital social worker who refused to let his file sit unfinished. Then a call was made to a veterans advocacy group, then another. And then someone recognized his name: Daniel Carter, Army aviation, medevac pilot, decorated, commended, silenced. Within weeks, representatives from a veterans organization showed up at the hospital. They didn't see a homeless man in a hospital gown. They saw a pilot. They saw a record that didn't add up. They saw a story that had been buried. Maya was there the day they walked into his room. Daniel looked confused at first, guarded. One of the representatives placed a folder gently on the table beside his bed. "Sir," he said carefully, "we believe you were wrongfully discharged." The room fell silent. Daniel didn't respond, but his hands trembled, not from illness this time, from memory. Years earlier, during a classified overseas operation, Daniel had witnessed a decision that cost innocent lives. A rushed command, faulty intelligence, pressure from higher up. After the mission, he filed a formal report. He expected accountability. Instead, he was labeled unstable. His performance reviews shifted. His clearance was quietly revoked. His career ended without explanation. He lost his identity before he lost his home. "I told the truth," Daniel whispered in that hospital room. "That's all I did." And for the first time in years, someone answered him. "We know." The advocacy group had found inconsistencies in his case: missing documentation, altered evaluations, internal memos that contradicted the official version of events. Daniel wasn't unstable. He was inconvenient. Within months, a formal review process began. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was paperwork, hearings, statements, old commanders being questioned, retired officers being contacted. But it was movement, and movement meant hope. Maya visited him through it all. She watched something return to him slowly. Not pride, but posture. Not arrogance, but steadiness. For the first time, he wasn't just surviving, he was being heard.
The day the decision came, Maya was sitting beside him. The letter was short, official, direct. His discharge status was upgraded, his record corrected, full honors restored, back pay approved, medical benefits reinstated. Daniel read the letter twice. Then he lowered it. "They can't give me back the years," he said quietly. "No," Maya replied softly, "but they can give you back your name." A few weeks later, something extraordinary happened. A small ceremony was organized by the local Veterans Association. Nothing grand, just a modest room, a folded flag, a handful of chairs. But word spread. Veterans showed up. Nurses from the hospital came. Even strangers who had heard part of his story stood quietly in the back. Daniel stood at the front of the room in a pressed jacket, his hair trimmed, his shoulders squared. When they called his name, Captain Daniel Carter, the room rose in applause, not loud, but long. Maya felt tears fill her eyes, because she remembered the corner of 8th Street, the broken laundromat, the cardboard sign. Daniel stepped to the microphone. "For a long time," he said, voice steady but thick with emotion, "I thought the truth didn't matter. I thought I didn't matter. I was wrong." He paused. One person stopped. One person listened, and that changed everything. His eyes found Maya in the crowd. If you see someone on the street, don't just see their circumstances. You don't know the uniform they once wore, the battles they fought, the sacrifices they made. The room was silent, because everyone understood. But the story didn't end there. Daniel could have taken the benefits, moved into housing, and lived quietly. Instead, he chose something else. He began speaking publicly, at schools, at community centers, at veterans events. Not about politics, not about anger, about visibility, about dignity, about what happens when systems fail, and what happens when ordinary people refuse to. His story gained attention. Local news picked it up, then national outlets, and with attention came something powerful. Other veterans started coming forward, men and women who had been quietly dismissed, medically discharged without proper review, labeled unstable when they spoke up. A review panel was eventually formed to re-examine similar cases. Daniel's fight became bigger than him. It became a doorway. Months later, Maya stood in a hospital hallway in her new scrubs. She had finished nursing school. She was officially Nurse Maya Johnson. That evening, an elderly man was brought into the ER, disoriented, unkempt, alone. Some staff members sighed quietly. Maya walked straight to him. She knelt beside his stretcher. "Hi," she said gently. "What's your name?" He looked at her, surprised, and in that moment she saw it again, that flicker, that humanity waiting to be acknowledged. Across town, Daniel sat in a small office at the Veterans Center, helping another former service member fill out paperwork. He moved slower now, but his voice was strong. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was present, respected, restored. And it all started with a sandwich. Not money, not power, not influence. Compassion. One person choosing not to walk past. One person choosing to say a name. They called him a homeless man. She called him Daniel. And because she did, thousands were reminded that heroes don't stop existing when the world stops looking. Sometimes, the greatest act of patriotism isn't flying a flag. It's seeing the person right in front of you,
and refusing to let them disappear.
Weeks later, Daniel left the hospital. He didn't return to 8th Street. He didn't return to the brick wall. A veterans advocacy group arranged temporary housing, a small furnished apartment, clean sheets, hot water, a door that locked. The first night, he stood in the middle of the room for a long time, not moving, just listening. No traffic inches from his face, no cold wind against concrete, just silence, real silence. It felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. Recovery wasn't instant. Pneumonia takes strength with it, and so does betrayal. Physical therapy appointments, follow-up evaluations, meetings with legal representatives, paperwork that stretched back years. His service records were reopened, not quietly this time, formally, officially. Old maintenance logs were reviewed, internal emails resurfaced, chains of command examined. The complaint he filed years ago was no longer a forgotten document. It was evidence. Other pilots began stepping forward, carefully, then more confidently. Some had noticed the same discrepancies. Some had signed papers they regretted. Some had stayed silent. The story wasn't just about one helicopter or one mission. It was about pressure, about numbers, about keeping aircraft operational at any cost. Daniel had refused, and that refusal had cost him everything. At least, that's what he thought, until now. Meanwhile, Maya kept working. Diner mornings, grocery evenings, study sessions squeezed between exhaustion. But something inside her had changed. She walked differently, straighter, more certain, because she had seen what a single decision could do. One stop, one question, one sandwich, and a buried truth had resurfaced. One afternoon, Daniel called her. His voice sounded stronger, clearer. "They amended my discharge status," he said. She stopped walking. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm no longer listed as psychologically unstable." A small pause. "It means they acknowledged procedural retaliation pending full review." She smiled. "That means they're admitting something." "Yes," he said quietly, "they are." The investigation expanded. A formal review board assembled. Military attorneys, aviation safety specialists, oversight officials. This time, the room listened. Daniel wasn't dismissed. He wasn't interrupted. He wasn't labeled unstable. He was addressed as Captain Carter, and that mattered. He described the day he discovered the altered maintenance entries, the aircraft clearance that didn't match internal reports, the pressure from a superior officer to adjust documentation, the moment he refused to sign. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He simply told the truth. Again. Outside of courtrooms and offices, something else was happening. Veteran communities rallied, not loudly, but steadily. Messages of support, public petitions, former crew members reaching out. You saved lives, even if they never admitted it. The story reached local news, then national outlets, not framed as scandal, but as accountability, as integrity, as the cost of doing the right thing. Months passed. Then came the official statement. Records corrected, service history fully restored, discharge status amended with honor, back pay approved, medical benefits reinstated. It wasn't dramatic, no applause, no ceremony, just a signed document. But that document carried weight. It carried acknowledgement. Daniel Carter was officially recognized for his service and for his integrity. One evening, near sunset, he returned to 8th Street, not because he had to, because he wanted to. The abandoned laundromat looked the same, cracked brick, layered graffiti, traffic rushing past. But something felt different. He stood where he used to sit, hands in his jacket pockets, breathing slowly. Maya walked up beside him. "Are you okay?" she asked. He nodded. "I spent years thinking this wall was the end of my story." A pause. It wasn't. Cars passed. People hurried by. Some glanced at them. None recognized him. And that was fine. "You changed my life," he said quietly. Maya shook her head. "I brought you a sandwich." He smiled. "No," he replied. "You called me by my name." Silence settled gently between them. Not heavy, not empty, just peaceful. That fall, Maya received her acceptance letter. Nursing school, full admission. She read it twice to make sure, then a third time. Her hands trembled, not from cold this time, from possibility. On her first day of clinical training, she paused outside the hospital doors. Different hospital, different chapter, but the same purpose. Her phone buzzed, a message from Daniel. "Proud of you. Keep seeing people." She looked up at the building, took a deep breath, and walked inside. Daniel didn't return to flying. Some chapters close permanently. But he began speaking at veterans advocacy events. Not about anger, not about revenge, but about accountability, about courage, about the cost of silence and the value of integrity. He always ended the same way, with one person who decided to see me. Because in the end, this story was never just about helicopters or investigations or buried reports. It was about a freezing morning, a tired young woman, a man against a brick wall, and a simple question: "Have you eaten today?" They called him homeless. She called him Daniel. And that changed everything.